Okay, item 4B. This is discussion and presentation regarding fiscal year 2022 and 23 budget, sponsored by the Executive Office. CEO Antle.
Darcy Antle, Interim CEO. We are presenting a budget workshop for 22-23 fiscal year. As the pandemic continues to impact our lives, our community, economy, and work environment, what we thought was going to be a short-term changes forced us to embrace new normals, new forms of communication, virtual teams working, less one-on-one person interaction, working from home, space technology, access to internet, creating hybrid meetings that increase the technology and support for the Board of Supervisors meetings. What once took one clerk in a meeting now takes 3. As in the past 4 years, the county residents experienced 2 devastating wildfires. The county saw an increase in tourism in the spring, the summer, with a fiscal decline in the cannabis industry and negative impacts on the county general fund. The vacancy rate at the county has grown over 6% in the last 3 years. Recruitment continues to be a challenge across many industries within the county, including public and private businesses, lodging, restaurants, healthcare, and the county. As you know, the impacts of the drought will continue into the future, as well as the pandemic and wildfires. The county must remain fiscally conservative with taxpayer dollars in order to provide core mandated services. Per the board direction, on April 19th, 2022, the fiscal team had meetings with each of the departments to review their expenses and position allocations. We are thankful to the many departments that offered up what little they had in their budget. The budget ad hoc was on these meetings, and I think they realized how tight the county and the departments managed their budgets. At this time, I'll turn the presentation over to Sarah Pierce and Tim Hallman, Acting Deputy CEOs.
Good morning again, Supervisors. This is Acting Deputy CEO Tim Hallman. Going through the presentation outline, we're going to go through here, and just like on the last one, we're going to go ahead and present the board goals and priorities. We do have some edits that were brought forward by some of the supervisors that will be available on those goals and priorities. We'll also be looking at the departmental funding and the requested adjustments for the fiscal year of 22-23. Sarah will be taking a closer look at ARPA funding, just so that we can see where the current allocations are and any recommendations by the board, of course. Fiscal year 22-23 Board of Supervisors funding considerations will be on one of the slides. And then future budget schedules coming up for some of the meetings and for the future workshops.
Darcy Antle, Interim CEO. At this time, I would like to point out that we've added the climate initiative. Some of these items were already on your board goals and priorities, but we've added the climate initiatives, called out the use of solar, electric, and hybrid vehicles, and the Climate Action Committee. Passing back to Sarah Pierce.
Good morning, Board of Supervisors and CEO Antle. Sarah Pierce, Acting Deputy CEO. As CEO Antle mentioned in the introduction, the budget ad hoc and the fiscal team met with departments to further review their budgets. The budget ad hoc and fiscal team are very appreciative of the 8 departments listed on the slide, which were able to adjust expenses and reduce the impact to the general fund by $1.2 million. As noted in the presentation, there are a few departments who are taking a phased approach to hiring vacant positions. For these departments, such as Animal Control or District Attorney, who have adjusted their plan to fill vacant positions immediately, the $1.7 million reserved from ARPA funding to bring staffing back to pre-COVID levels could potentially be applied depending on availability of remaining funds. Moving on to further review of ARPA funding, the fiscal team reviewed the departmental one-time funding requests and have determined the 7 projects listed on the slide are eligible under the General County Services section of ARPA, and proposes the board consider funding these projects through ARPA versus the general fund. The fiscal team would like to mention the additional internal requests from the ARPA, which has equated to over 25 million, is still being reviewed and will be brought back to the board at a later date. The additional requests were not part of the 22-23 departmental requests. As a reminder, ARPA funding has an obligation period which runs through December of 2024, and any projects funded under ARPA must be completed by December of 2026. Now I'll turn it back over to CEO Antle.
A couple of points I would like to make on the ARPA. These, again, are one-time funds. And I would also like to point out that the 4 cities within the county of Mendocino received ARPA funds. The city of Fort Bragg, 1.7, Point Arena, 100,000, the city of Ukiah, 3.8 million, and the city of Willits, 1.1 million. So again, these are one-time funds that don't have to be obligated until 2024. Moving on to the Board of Supervisors funding consideration, taking into consideration the asks and then the possible ARPA projects, we need an additional 3.3 million to meet the other demands of the county for this coming fiscal year. So there's some serious consideration that this board may want to take into account, and that would consider defunding non-core mandated services. The museum is a general fund ask of $550,000 that brings in revenue, annual revenue of $25,000. You could consider shuttering this facility for a 1 month or a 12-month period. Parks, new department is asking for $1.6 million to take care of our parks. You could consider delaying that ask and putting those off, or look at other funding streams for parks. Facility is requesting an additional $1 million over net county cost. You could consider reducing this ask, lowering their ability to hire, or slowing their ability to hire positions. Information technology has $376,000 for towards their reserve. You could consider delaying that. Prevention, recovery, resiliency, and mitigation is a non-general fund department, but is requesting $400,000 of general fund. You could consider reducing that a percentage. And then you could review the cannabis revenue after May 31, where we could find out and see if we have met and folks have paid their taxes. As of recently, approximately 1,170 delinquent cannabis taxes for this fiscal year. That amounts to $3.1 million. So if that revenue comes in, we may have additional revenue to consider for 22-23. And I did flag the 3 departments: facilities, information technologies, and prevention recovery, as those are not core mandated services, but they are goals and priorities of this board. And at this time, I'll turn it back over to Tim. I think all we have is the future budget schedules.
Correct. I get the big slide. Supervisors, coming up is the June 7th and 8th workshop. It'll be 2 days of hearings involving the budget, where you get to make the decisions, the hard decisions, as to where the budget will land. And at the conclusion of those hearings, hopefully we'll have been given the appropriate direction, and we'll be able to come back on June 22nd for the budget adoption. Are there any questions?
Supervisor Mulhern.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think this board has made it a priority to make sure that our team members are comfortable and supported. And so I have concerns about not prioritizing facilities to making sure that our employees have a safe and comfortable working environment. If we intend to attract and recruit and retain the best employees that are available, we really can't expect them to be working in facilities that have leaking roofs and inadequate IT infrastructure. So our people are our power, and if we don't have people working for us that are comfortable and supported, we have an inability to provide services.
Supervisor Jurdy.
Yeah, well, I think Supervisor Mulhern for highlighting the report earlier where it mentioned $13 million in the Great Plates program that was distributed to Mendocino County restaurants and residents as one of many programs that the county was able to link up with the federal government during the pandemic. I think to the extent that we look at proposals that come in from nonprofits or community-based groups, I think one, we need to be really clear that there's not, an infinite amount of money available, but that it would be some fraction, some portion of this. But the other thing is, I would like to encourage the nonprofits that come to the county seeking some of the ARPA funds to look for ways that they could work with the county to develop and encourage Mendocino County residents to look at working for the County of Mendocino. I mean, let's make this a win-win for both organizations. Many of the nonprofit, over the years, I've seen a number of people working for the nonprofits who later, 5-10 years later, began working for the county. Maybe they could work for the county after 2 or 3 years with the nonprofit. And so I think if we look at the job requirements that the county has through HR, and the job requirements that the nonprofits have, there's got to be some linking there. And I know that the HR department just recently sent out a notice of educational opportunities, something I'd like to see them do at least every other month and expand upon what they sent out yesterday. Maybe that some of those classes could be available to people who aren't currently county employees but are looking to work for the county but maybe haven't taken the required classes to get a county job. And again, we could make this something that would be beneficial both for the nonprofits seeking county funds through ARPA and helping the county grow its workforce, because the county has quite a few vacant positions right now, and as do most employers in the area. So it's kind of an odd time that we live in. It's a little bit like the Dickens with the best of times, it was the worst of times. I mean, that's kind of what we're living through right now.
Supervisor Haschek.
Thank you, Chair. There's a couple issues here, certainly. The parks. So when we look at this ask of almost 1.6 million, and we all know that the parks are underfunded, yet they're dear to people's hearts. And they're throughout the county except for the 3rd district. And a lot of these parks, like we just spent $175,000 on Bower Park for this remediation of hazardous conditions. What if we were looking at the CSA 3 model, the County Service Area 3, and the zone of benefit. And we were looking at it for, this second access routes or emergency access routes and safer communities for the Sherwood corridor. And we went through that process for quite a while. We learned a lot during the process. We're still moving on it. But that process can also be used for parks or other zones of benefits. So what if, people in Westport or Covelo or Willits don't know that there's a Bower Park or Faulkner Park or some of these others. There's no connection to them. The county is subsidizing those wholly. And what if we went to a CSA 3 model for those parks so that those communities could sustain those parks in the manner that they felt was appropriate for what they wanted to get from the parks? And so I just think that might be a way forward to really properly fund the parks in our county. because they are dear to people's hearts, but I think it's really a localized dearness, or affection, and that maybe there's a better way of funding them appropriately rather than through the general fund of the county.
No, and I don't disagree with that. And if we go down that path, we should also fund water locally. We shouldn't do a countywide sales tax for water because the people who are benefiting should be the ones paying. There's a lot of services that we could break up with these service areas. But I will say that the residents on the South Coast pay tax to the county. They don't get much. I mean, if try calling 911 on the South Coast, right? And this is no fault of the sheriff. He doesn't have enough resources. They get a few potholes filled. That's basically it. So, the equity, I think what you're bringing up is are we spending our general fund equitably across the county to serve all residents? I think we should study that and see what the breakdown looks like. And it may be that some areas are getting more than their fair share and others are getting less. And it is our job to try to balance that. County Council?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to make sure the board is aware, you could use a zone of benefit and a special benefit assessment to impose some of the financial burden for certain projects on the nearby property owners. Parks is definitely an eligible use of that function. You can't quite get to 100% of the cost recovery. So I just want to be clear, the way that the constitutional amendment is structured, it's only what is considered to be the special benefit, that is the benefits that's unique to those nearby parcels, that can be captured through that revenue stream. And there will always be some component of whether it's general fund or other sort of funding requirement from a tax base or other source.
Supervisor Mulhern?
Thank you. Yeah, just in regards to parks, we're not talking about adding water slides and magic trick carousels. We're talking about basic maintenance. We're talking about keeping the trees safe so that the kids can play Little League. And when you talk about parks, it's a very challenging subject, especially at budget time. But we all know that parks are priceless. It provides healthy activities to kids. It provides tourism income to our county. I mean, I could go on and on about the value of parks, and I don't think that that's necessary. I think what I want to highlight is that we're not talking about world-class parks. We're talking about parks that are safe for the kids of Mendocino County. And I have the very fortunate ability to sit in the 2nd District seat, which is mostly the city of Ukiah, which has a ridiculous amount of parks and a very great park staff and resources to maintain those parks and offer healthy activities and community events. And I think that the other areas of the county should get to have a little bit of that resource as well, especially when we're talking about keeping kids safe and in physical and healthy activities. So I just wanted to highlight, it's not magic money. It's really for the safety of our communities.
Thank you. Supervisor McGordy?
Just to kind of build on what Supervisor Mulhern has talked about, I also serving on the Parks Ad Hoc, I'm just shocked at the level of neglect that our park system has. That really hasn't been funded. Specifically, which is, an extremely bad situation. And I look at Lake County, driving through Lake County recently on my way to RCRC meeting, all the lovely little parks that Lake County has, and even a county I think that's poorer than us put some priority on having community parks and having a place for people to go to recreate and exercise. And I think it's a priority just as much as food is, having access to the outdoors for children to play and for people to walk and to clear their minds, and more importantly, to be safe. I mean, that's the biggest concern right now. You look at Bower Park and it's not safe, and I'm glad that we're addressing it and use in a prompt manner. And 1.6 million for parks is kind of aspirational at this point. I don't think that we expect that to be fully funded, but certainly we need more than what's going in there now. So I don't, the fact that we've created a a Parks Division inside of General Services is a step in the right direction, but they have one maintenance worker to take care of everything on the coast. And, you know, in general, I would say that the maintenance people we have working out of doors for Mendocino County are wizards, looking at what they have to take care of and the amount of money we expend on it. So since I know this from a professional angle as well, having been involved in environmental horticulture, the money that we spend is utilized extremely effectively. There should be more of it because it is a community resource that's totally underutilized right now and not cared for properly.
Supervisor Hashtag.
Yeah, the question's not whether parks are dear to people's hearts or, you know, needed in a society, but rather how are we going to fund them appropriately? And I think that if we looked at the CSA 3 model, that might be a way of communities really taking responsibility for the county parks in their areas. Another issue I wanted to bring up was the BID, which is a future, it's going to be brought up on another agenda item, but it has to do with the budget. And when the request is for, or the county match for the Mendocino Tourist Council or whatever, Visit Mendocino, is going to be $580,000, which is over $100,000 increase from last year. You know, we need to really look at that contract or that ordinance that we have in place, because as our transient occupancy tax goes up and then the BID tax goes up, then the county's obligation goes up, and it's just it's putting us in a bind. And I think that we don't have the $580,000 this year to really match it at this point. And so we need to look at that ordinance going forward.
Should we utilize our UC Cooperative Extension partnership to ask a economist to look at the situation and help guide us? What's the level of contribution where we get a return on investment? Supervisor Jurdy?
Yeah, just on parks, because people have different experiences with city parks. So in Ukiah, the city, for I'm not sure exactly what reasons, but for a variety of reasons, I assume, has acquired many acres in multiple city parks. The city of Willits has actually a substantial amount of parks near the county museum, that area of Willits. They may have more than those parks, but those are fairly large city parks. City of Fort Bragg it has historically only had 2 city parks. One was Bainbridge Park, where there's a playground. It's an urban neighborhood community park, and a 7-acre wilderness park called Otis Johnson Park. And then very recently, in the last 20 years, it's acquired some oceanfront parks through the Coastal Conservancy and money from Caltrans. And so, but those are regional kind of trail parks. So the parks throughout Mendocino County, even in our most urban areas, are really different depending on which of the 3 metro areas you live in. And then in rural in Mendocino County, you know, the parks are probably almost exclusively either a state park or a school ground. And so again, in Fort Bragg, outside of Bainbridge Park, the playgrounds, the ball fields, they're not city parks, they're school district properties. So I think this idea that of who owns the parks and what the expectations are of people is different depending on what area of the county they chose to live in. And I think there could be a greater expectation for municipal parks in the greater Ukiah Valley, because the city of Ukiah has done such a great job of acquiring land and developing parks over the years that hasn't really been consistent throughout the rest of the county.
Supervisor McGordy?
I want to continue the discussion that Supervisor Haschak started under the BIDs, but we have 4E coming up, and I think that'd be a good time I can give some historical information about the creation of our county efforts to promote the county and some of the promises that were made that I think we have to keep. And as far as University of California Cooperative Extension assistance, of course, they're totally available to assist us in trying to figure out a return on investment for things like parks or other expenditures.
Great, let's come back to that. I did sit in on all of the budget workshops, and when we went back to each department asking if they could find any creative opportunities to reduce their ask, and we were excited when one came up with $1,250. That's the level. It was like looking for pennies in departments that are already very lean. One item that on this presentation that we haven't discussed is the museum. It was at $550,000 county contribution. Is there any possibility of moving that closer to cost recovery? And I know we don't have enough for the current needs of the county. We actually have less revenue to work with in the year ahead than last year. And I think the public and the state constitution are clear that public safety is the #1 priority. So I'd like to see us focus first on public safety. When we feel like it's met at an adequate level, then look at what's left. But it's clear that that there's not enough, that we do need to make some reductions somewhere. CEO Antle.
Darcy Antle, interim CEO. I just want to point out a couple of things. One, with regards to the parks, the $1.6 million, that is for staffing and operational needs. They are asking for $4.8 million in ARPA for the deferred maintenance on the parks, just for your information. And then, while I still have the floor, I would like to give a shout out to the departments that worked with us during those meetings. And that was the Ag Department, Animal Care, District Attorney, Human Resources, Information Services, Museum, Planning and Building Services, and the Sheriff's Office. They were all brought back some funding to help support the net county costs, and that is on slide 6 in the packet. And then I'd also like to remind this board with regards to the reserves. We still are looking for outside funding to reduce our current bonds and then look for funding for the jail and some CIP projects. The jail and the CIP projects themselves are $7 million. In order to move those forward, depending on the time that the outside audit is complete, we may not have the funding and we may need to reach into the reserves in order to keep these programs going and not have additional costs.
Supervisor Haschak.
Thank you, Chair. With the museum, my understanding when talking with Deputy CEO Hallman about the cost of the museum is that, you know, the museum's not something that you can just close the door and say, we're going to save $555,000. If you close the doors, we're still going to have cost. We still have an incredible collection of artifacts in the museum that are going to need care and everything. And the cost of the building maintenance and all that still happens. So my understanding was that it was more like $400,000. But, you know, I've been active with the museum. They've got a Friends of the Museum group that got formed about a year ago. They're working on a strategic plan with the director, Sampson. And I think that they're moving in the right direction. In the last couple of years, they made great progress. This past year, you know, we've seen some programs that were very well received from people throughout the county. And, you know, this is something, the museum is what connects our county together. It's our history. And whether you're a Pomo Indian or, you know, you're homesteader on the coast or whatever, you know, there's something representing you, the ag community, all of that is represented in the museum. And so it's hard to say, well, it's just a financial decision, because it really is integral to who we are as a people. And I'd like to work with the Friends of the Museum and find out if there's better cost recovery, because they do have programs in the strategic plan we're working on. It is greater outreach to the community, bringing in more groups, using the facilities that we have, and so there could be more cost recovery.
So I support the arts. But I'm here, I think, Sarah brought up a really good point about the ARPA funds, that we do have a poverty-stricken county. The only way that we can use ARPA funds for other purposes to benefit the people is to reduce the county spending. What areas do we want to reduce county spending so that we can repurpose ARPA funds? And I'm not hearing ideas for what we can trim. I would think $550,000 for the museum is important. To me, it's not important as public safety. If I had to decide between the two, public safety wins out. If we have people who are hungry that we're not serving, I want to feed them first before the arts and the parks, right? So there's some ranking in my mind of what's important in this county to look out for the most vulnerable, ensure public safety, and then see what's left. But I'm hearing mutually exclusive ideas that we want to repurpose ARPA funds and that we want to continue spending as proposed. I guess I'm looking for the board to give some feedback to staff. Where do we want the CEO to go with these ideas? Supervisor Jurdy.
In looking at these slides, just some of the language is not clear to me what's trying to be conveyed by the budget team. So if we just go, for example, on slide 8, facilities is requesting $1 million above net county costs, reduced by a percentage. So I'm not clear what's the suggestion there. 1%, 5%? I'm not sure what the suggestion is.
Darcy Antle, interim CEO. It's giving you consideration of, do you want to reduce that by 50%, 25%? You could also look at reducing the IT reserve and then reducing your contribution to the prevention, recovery, resiliency, and mitigation as well. So we didn't throw out an exact percentage because we didn't know what direction this board would like to go in with the other items. You could put it back to us to bring it back forward to you with some other recommendations if you would like, or you can give us direction now.
I don't think there's enough information here to give direction. I mean, we're just seeing bullet points here.
Darcy Antle, interim CEO. So we're looking for $3.3 million. And if you close the museum, that reduces it. And then if you don't fund the parks at 1.6, that would reduce the 3.3 even further. So at that point, you're down to needing an additional $2 million. And so then we sort through these other items as you would like.
So just my own feedback, the parks, if I understand this correctly, that's a $1.6 million in new staff hires that don't exist today. So that one's fairly easy for me to make a suggestion, just speaking for myself. The museum, I think that's a bit radical to just, it feels like pulling the rug under the museum. I think we do need to have, as a full board, a better understanding of what the long-term strategy is for the museum. I think that there are opportunities for the museum to not only receive gifts of historical items, but gifts of monetary donations, 401k donations, an endowment they may have already established through the Community Foundation of Mendocino where people can give to it to keep it going. I think it's potentially a good recipient for those kinds of donations and not just artifacts. I think one small move might be to go to everybody who's ever donated an artifact to the museum to say, would they like to donate to an endowment to preserve those artifacts and keep the museum doors open each year. Facilities, again, I'm not exactly clear what the $1 million above net, what's the effect of reducing that by 100% or 50%? I'm not clear on what that entails.
I'll turn it over to Sarah Pierce. She has the working document.
Acting Deputy CEO Sarah Pierce. It is my understanding, and Tim, feel free to jump in, that the $1 million is additional funding that is needed to continue standard operating procedures as it stands today. If this was not funded, it would either reduce staff or reduce utilities or other operating expenses.
Correct.
So I'd like to, personally, I'd like to defer that conversation until we see the building facilities plan. That's just my own input. The information technology reserve, you know, we fund quite a bit with IT when we have one-time funds. I don't know that the reserves are the most critical. I mean, if we reduce it by 376, is that eliminating the reserves altogether, or is that a reduction?
That was an ask for this fiscal year.
Yeah, I don't see that as critical or essentials given how much we fund IT through, you know, one-time funds. Prevention, recovery, resiliency, $400,000. What exactly would that $400,000 reduction result in?
Acting Deputy CEO Sarah Pierce, the $400,000 is a combination of operating expenses, including our grant writer, and then staffing.
You know, I think we saw a presentation only a couple months ago, maybe a month ago, where the recovery team has brought in, you know, multiples of dollars into the county for every dollar we spend. I think that would be kind of penny wise, pound foolish to reduce that funding. And then the review cannabis revenue after May 31st, which we can't do until May 31st. So that's my input.
CEO Antle, do you have a rough tally of what those reductions will look like?
Well, just off the top of my head, Darcy Antle, interim CEO, just taking the two that Supervisor Jurdy, which was the parks and information technology, reducing those, that would be 1.8. So we would be looking, what, Sarah, 2.3? You got it.
Acting Deputy CEO Sarah Pierce, if we were to reduce parks fully at the 1.592 and the information technology, there would still need an additional 1.3 million.
Supervisor Mulhern.
I'm wondering if Atlas could bring in Department Head Janelle Rao to discuss the parks budget. It's my understanding from having served on the ad hoc and then bringing that item back twice to this board that there were no parks that we wanted to close. So if we don't find a way to fund them, they have to be closed. We can't have it both ways. So I want to just be very clear that we tried to bring back that conversation twice, and we didn't get the message that we wanted any parks closed. So if Ms. Rao could please clarify that for the board, I would appreciate it.
Good morning, board members. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Thank you. Janelle Rao, General Services Agency Director. I want to thank you for the discussion on your county park systems. As Supervisors Mulhern and McGordy have mentioned, the park systems have been neglected, I could say, from a fiscal perspective for many years. You're looking at probably, at least to my knowledge, back to the 80s when the park systems were transferred into the General Services Department. I want to clarify a few things here. The 1.5, close to 1.6 million in operational costs includes current and existing staffing. So we're not talking about additional staff to the tune of 1.6 million. So if you did not fund that, you're defunding funded position or filled positions. So a percentage of your operating costs, including your facilities division manager, your assistant division manager, and the administrative overhead to support your park system. So I wanted to make sure that was clear. And I think the existing parks costs or the salaries are approximately $400,000. the presented model for funding, the board has received 2 updates on the parks needs assessment, phase 1 and phase 2. Phase 2 was most recently in March of 2022. The staffing model represented for a park system our size recommended approximately 32 FTE to support our parks. Currently, right now, you have 1.0 FTE in a landscaper that serves your parks. The support for maintenance is shared throughout our maintenance crew, who are also supporting your 60 plus owned real property. If you don't, I mean, what we're trying to be is realistic. So the proposed budget per the board's direction during the phase 2 presentation of the parks needs assessment was to come in with what we believe is fair and reasonable to at least begin to support the parks in a manner that would keep them safe. The staffing model represents an additional 6.0 approximately FTE. 3 of those are landscapers, 2 are maintenance. And then again, the administrative structure to support that, you already have that in place, but we're looking at true cost of supporting your park. So it includes those salaries that are supporting your parks now. As also mentioned by interim CEO Antle, was the parks critical funding capital improvement that's near is 4.8 million. And as evidenced by several recent items with one of your park system at Bauer Park, you have some issues regarding safety that need to be addressed in your parks, or you will have to discuss closing them because, again, of our obligation to keep them safe. While I'm also here, I would like to speak about facilities and ensure that this board also understands that the 1 million is not an ask above net county cost, as DCEO Sarah Pierce mentioned. That's just your baseline operating costs for facilities and maintaining your 65 owned real property, as well as your over 45 leased properties. I just wanted to make sure that was clear. It's very much baseline. Over the last 2 fiscal years, facilities has seen a reduction in their net county cost, as also evidenced by the third quarter report showing that facilities was anticipating coming in over their net county costs. And I want to mention that's probably the first time I know in my tenure that has occurred. There were some funding reductions in the utilities line item in this current fiscal year that were not would not have been adequate to serve our existing owned infrastructure. So if you were to look at any reduction in the facilities operating budget, you would look at either reducing your staff that are currently filled or shutting down buildings, or both. Because at this point, it's just your baseline cost to operate. So I just wanted to make sure that was also clear. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
CEO Antle.
This is a question for Ms. Rao. Is there any way to go to cost recovery on the parks?
Cost recovery on parks would be a little difficult. When the fees for parks came forward a few years ago, the board gave direction to keep those fees relative and in comparison to the state parks funding or fee structure. We've looked at cost recovery. The cost to our community using the parks would be relatively not. It wouldn't be reasonable. But it's most certainly we've discussed this with the parks ad hoc over the last 6 months at length, and there are opportunities for concessioning. There are opportunities for partnering with stakeholders, but your parks have to be brought up to a condition to where they're safe before you can start to engage with any of these stakeholders. An example is the city of Ukiah and discussing Low Gap Park, and there's some great opportunity for partnering there. But again, we would have to put some work into improving those parks in order to make them safe.
So when I think about parks, I don't think we can close a park. We might say it's closed. The people will use it. And we're going to still suffer the liability of somebody getting hurt. I was out at Faulkner Park on Friday, and we were meeting with PG&E and talking about the limbing and hopefully not tree removal to mitigate fire risk. And I look over 10 feet from where we're meeting, here's a county-owned meter and breaker box dangling from the wire, completely rotted off from the pole. So, and I think this is the case at all of our county parks, that we have deferred maintenance at a level that's unsafe. So, Janelle, can you tell us what would the amount be to keep the parks open, not to improve conditions, but to provide adequate safety so that we're not at risk, so that the visitors to the parks are not at risk? Maybe we don't do fancy landscaping, but that electric box needs to be repaired. Is that what you're asking, or can you trim back slightly?
Through the chair, the 4.8 million that interim CEO Antle referenced is a list of what has been identified through your most, it's been about approximately 3-year period of parks needs assessment along with your capital improvement team. Those have been determined as safety and risks projects that must be addressed in order to fully assess your parks you could do it as on a 3-year phased-in approach. For example, we've identified them by priority, meaning critical, high, medium, and low of that 4.8. I believe it's approximately 2 million as the highest. And I would say in the next 12 months, it would be in the county's best interest to most certainly approach those critical project needs. And then over the next 3 to 4 years, the 4.8 million is critical in order to keep those parks safe and open. We've been working very closely with your risk management team as well, and your safety team to assess the parks, which is why at this time your Bauer Park is closed.
Supervisor Haschek.
Yeah, the parks, like I've said before, they don't have enough money. We're going to have this problem every year from now on because the county doesn't have the money. And I just think that we need to be thinking outside the box. We need to be thinking about different approaches to how we can properly fund and provide the services that these parks need. And I think the CSA 3 is one model to do that, but there must be other models too. But what we're doing doesn't work right now.
I agree with you on both points. I don't know that the CSA 3, if implemented, will solve it for this fiscal year.
No, I don't think for this fiscal year.
Yeah.
But I think long-term, we need to be figuring out a solution to this situation.
Agreed. Supervisor McGordy.
So this is a question for Supervisor Jordy. So I know that there is a Parks and Rec district in Fort Bragg, and is that just funded through the general fund, or how does that work?
So it's a district, and so it's a special district in Mendocino County, just like there are water, wastewater districts. So the voters who live in those districts voted to create the district, and so a very small fraction of the property tax goes to that district. So I believe the same is the case with some of the other districts that we have in the county where there's a tiny fraction of the parcel tax, but it's not actually the city of Fort Bragg. It actually runs from, I think, about 10 Mile almost down to the Sonoma County line.
Interesting. Okay, so I know that the Mendocino Coast Botanical Garden is basically they're managing the botanical garden for the Parks and Rec district, correct?
Yeah, so the State Coastal Conservancy purchased the property and it was donated to the Rec and Park District, and then they have a nonprofit that actually manages the Mendocino Coast Botanical Gardens.
Mm-hmm.
So the board of the Mendocino Coast, or the Recreation and Park District, gets reports from the nonprofit, but they really don't have an active hand in managing the botanical gardens.
So I think that the potential for income on the parks differs. So some parks probably have no potential whatsoever. I keep using Mariposa Park as an example. It's just extremely small but much loved swimming hole in Redwood Valley. But when I think about the park in Philo, I'm sorry, its name is escaping me right now, but that's a very high value property where probably it could be concessionaire and actually have a positive cash flow working with someone in that neighborhood, as compared to other places where cost recovery might be more difficult, like Faulkner Park, where there's really not even a parking lot. I mean, these are things that, as we've looked at it through the Parks ad hoc, it's been difficult to see how you could do cost recovery to generate money, which is ideal. And it doesn't seem like we've had a real concerted effort to manage the parks. I know that Lake County is pretty good at involving itself in when the state has had park bonds issued, that Lake County's taken advantage of that. It doesn't seem like Mendocino County has any history at all of doing such a thing. I know Ukiah also has a really good history of applying for park bonds and grants, and their Parks and Rec department has been very, very proactive in making great facilities. I mean, I served on the Parks and Rec Commission, and I remember how active they were at trying to pursue money and grants. So, there's been some neglect. I think we've left money on the table where we probably could have done things over the years that would have put us in a much better position than we are today. Now we're just looking at kind of like a mess and saying, well, this is sort of bad news. Here we are, with no income, and suddenly the bill's coming due on all of this deferred maintenance in the park system. So I think it's fair to spend some ARPA money on it, because it is something that is used by the community and worth the investment.
So we should clarify with CEO Antle. I think you need us to identify about $2 million of additional cuts in order for us to balance the budget. But that assumes that we're applying ARPA funds to balance the budget. What if we didn't apply ARPA funds? What would we be looking at in cuts?
Darcy Antle, interim CEO, the cuts would be over $7 million. We are using the ARPA funds for one-time purchases that can be, move forward. They're not operationally that we would ask for. The 1.7 that we mentioned about, you could put into the miscellaneous budget, and as, for example, the district attorney hires people, you would be able to use those funds to backfill his budget for the 1000 series, or the sheriff's hiring bonuses. But again, those are one-time funds, so we would be hopeful that revenue increases as we move out of this economic downturn that we're seeing right now.
So we need to give you input on cutting $2 million to balance the budget. That's a requirement. And if we want to use ARPA funds for other purposes, we would need to identify additional cuts in the amount of ARPA we wish to free up.
Correct. And we can give direction back to staff, and we can continue to work on this with your other inputs to bring something back on the 7th and 8th when you will hear from the departments and our team as well, June 7th.
Supervisor Haschek?
So my question is about we're looking for $2 million in cuts, but is that after the reduction of the parks and the information technology reserve?
Correct.
So is there any other area besides the places listed that we could get some revenue?
Darcy Antle, interim CEO. At this point, we have met with all the departments per your request on the 19th, and the departments that I mentioned, which was a couple of handfuls, were able to come back with some money. At this time, there's no other areas that we are aware of that could be reduced. And again, the only other is if the cannabis revenue does come in, that's on May 31.
Supervisor McGordy?
So I know in the past, historically, another way that we've balanced the budget for the county has been delaying vehicle replacement as another possible source of savings on a temporary basis. And again, since we have Ms. Rao on the call, maybe she can talk about that, and what kind of an impact that may have if we did such a thing.
Through the chair, Janelle Rao, General Services Agency Director. We've General Services Agency, along with the Executive Office, have been studying your fleet for the last probably, well, I mean, forever, putting a concerted effort into it over the last 12 months. This board did give direction to come up with a replacement program that was presented to the board at Q1. That replacement program or plan gave you a schedule by which vehicles on an industry standard and in order to maintain not only safety, but, return on your investment when you were to sell the vehicles. For example, I think and Tim can correct me if I'm wrong, a sedan may be 100,000 miles in 4 years. Is that, I can't recall. That's it. Yes, he's nodding. So at this point in time, you have an aging fleet. I believe the approximately more than 50% of your fleet are 5 to 10 years or older. Some may have aged out by miles versus years. You could look at, as you have given this, the General Services Agency Director, a phased-in approach to replacing your fleet. Although I would caution the board with public safety that has been tried in the past, and you end up with a higher cost to maintain those vehicles. And then again, public safety as a priority. This board has wanted to ensure that those vehicles were safe for your officers to be driving in. So we want to make sure that that's always at the forefront of the board's mind when considering that. But there are other opportunities by which you can look at your fleet. You can look at underutilized vehicles. It's something that General Services has been studying, and soon we will be bringing forward, we call it telematics, and have discussed that when we presented the fleet program update in March. Telematics will be able to give us data by which we can present the efficiency of your fleet, how it's being used, the number of trips. For example, how many trips to the coast are being made per day per vehicle, and can this county and your departments be more efficient and effective in their use of their fleets? You may also want to reduce your overall size of your fleet. We are currently looking at the county's owned pool that we have, and in that pool, we may want to reduce those and ensure that we're being the most efficient we can. We do contract with Enterprise to utilize their fleet when need be to offset or to have additional resources when need be as well. And I hope that answered your question.
Well, it does, and I lived through it as a department head. So I remember that over the years we reduced the number of vehicles assigned to us, and we also drove vehicles for a long time, and like 16 years, but they were low mileage vehicles, so we felt they were fairly safe until finally we couldn't get replacement parts. And I'm not trying to put all of our problems off on our fleet services, but I know that's a place we've gone to before, and we're able to sometimes get additional funds to balance the budget from. And I haven't heard that mentioned today, so I just thought I'd bring that up.
Supervisor Mulhern.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It appears as though animal care and the district attorney really rolled up their sleeves to work on the vacant positions and reducing staffing and not filling those positions immediately. And I just wondered if the budget ad hoc or the executive office had any comments on the other departments that have had vacant positions for quite some time and their inability to put those positions forward as a request to have a reduction.
We did look at that, and a number of positions are being closed. And so what you need to find $2 million to cut, $7 million if we want to free up ARPA funds, after all of the departments and staff and the budget ad hoc work to make reductions. So we didn't see anything more in terms of creative or low-hanging fruit. After our work, we're this far off. I don't see, and this strikes me as a structural deficit. I don't see this as a one-time. We were living on cannabis revenue, average about $5 million a year. That game is over. And, cannabis is now in a legal market where the price will just be set by marginal revenue intersecting with marginal cost. In a county ordinance that only allows 10,000 square feet, figure 28 grams per square foot at market price, declining market price, that revenue is not coming back. And so the past couple of years, we've lived on revenue that we should have treated as one time, but instead it's been used to augment the county for staffing. This coming year, we don't have that revenue. We're probably not going to have it again. So the reason I bring this up is in the media, I've seen the idea of using our reserve. We have about $20 million of reserve. We're also looking at refinancing some of the county's debt. Well, we may struggle to refinance county debt if we don't have a reasonable reserve. We already don't have a reasonable reserve. For a county, $20 million is already low for a county our size. So we could use some reserve. It may end up incurring other expenses if we can't refinance debt. And today, that reserve is about 3 weeks of overall county spending. You could look at it on a discretionary revenue basis, and it would be a bit longer. It's not a huge reserve. And then last, the budget ad hoc found opportunities for long-term savings. There's room to build efficiency, but it takes money to build that efficiency. And so you need that initial seed investment. IT is a great example. If we can invest more in IT, there's room to reduce overall cost. We don't even have that seed financing at this point. CEO Antle.
Darcy Antle, interim CEO. I would just like to point out for fiscal year 22-23, we only have one general fund department coming forward with a vehicle request and fitting for that vehicle. The budget team has suggested using the ARPA fund for that because this is the sheriff's office and their vehicles are aging and they are for public safety.
How would the board feel about the finance team working on a list that we could all rank as far as highest priority to lowest? Everything is a priority, but if we have to cut somewhere, as a group, try to identify where we think those cuts would least impact the county as a whole.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable idea.
Supervisor Hascheck.
Yeah, that would be fine. I just think looking at this list of what we have left, if we were to cut the parks and information technology reserve, then it's only about 2.3 million that we have, and we're supposed to cut 2 million out of that. It just seems that there should be, there's something out there that we're missing. I guess I'd like to know, do we know what the end of the year, any carryover will be? Do we have any idea of that right now?
Darcy Antle, interim CEO. We don't expect any carry forward. We expect that we are going to have the deficit still remaining in the health plan. And we are working on a plan for that. But operationally, we expect to balance at this point. Right. We don't expect any carry forward.
And for clarification, when you say cut the parks, I think that means actually cut the current staffing. What I heard from Director Rowell was that includes people who currently work for us. So we would be laying them off. It's not a cut, nice to have improvements. It's actually a staff reduction.
Well, when I look at this list of funding considerations and we're trying to get the 3.3 with that, it only comes up to, 3.5 or so. So we pretty much got to, if we're limited to this list, then we pretty much got to cut it all.
We're not limited to that list.
Okay,
the board can decide to cut in any area. My urging would be not public safety, but we're free to cut any general fund expenditures. Supervisor Mulhern.
I need a more clear picture of the ARPA funding and what it can be used for and how we could use it to backfill our county costs and even beyond facilities, but also our staffing, the work that's been done by a multitude of departments. And also we all know, for instance, that during COVID shelter in place beginning in 2020, which was before I was on the board, that many of our community members were using outside resources like parks. And I'm wondering how much of the ARPA dollars could be used beyond the 4.8. I mean, it seems to me that outdoor recreation really had its highlight during that time in the beginning of spring. And it seems like a suitable use of ARPA funds for me. So I would like to know more about the ARPA funds and how else they could be used to backfill our dollars.
Darcy Antle, interim CEO. That would be a question for acting deputy CEO Sarah Pierce.
Acting Deputy CEO Sarah Pierce. So per the final guidelines of ARPA, up to $10 million of our award can be used on general county services. Outside of that, parks is an eligible expense, along with responding to public health and economic impacts. Sorry, one moment. And then addressing the negative economic impacts and water and sewer infrastructure, along with broadband. So currently, we have already, currently our award is $16.8 million, of which we've received 8.4 in August of 2021, and we're expecting to receive the remaining 8.4 in August of 2022. Of that 16.8 million, we have already obligated 4.8 million, and we've, which means there's about 12 million unobligated. Of that 12 million, 10 can be used on county core services, and then the remaining can be used on staffing to pre-COVID levels, or parks is an eligible expense.
Supervisor Mulhern.
Thank you. I would like to have a sense from the board. I understand it seems as though there's been some conversations in the community or suggestions made that there would be one-time funding available made to the community from ARPA funds. I've seen this happen with the county long before I was on the board. I think I've even applied for grants when the county had surplus, and we saw with the PG&E funds a process that could potentially work. But I would like to have a sense from this board, is there a percentage in your mind? Is there a dollar amount in your mind that you're thinking of making available for community grants? I mean, are we talking, yeah, I just wonder if there's a dollar amount or a percentage that you're thinking we want to make available. I think that clarifying that in advance of accepting any kind of requests would be beneficial to the community. It's very different to say we have $500,000 than we have $3 million. So I didn't know if there were any board members that had a sense of what they expect that to look like.
Supervisor Jordy.
So I think we would need more information to come up with that number, but I think that's a good idea to have a number like that so everybody knows what they're looking at. I think if we do, I only would support it if it was available to be allocated by supervisor district. The item you're referring to had to do with about, 6 years ago, Supervisor McCowan urged the board, and the board agreed to reduce the amount of money that it put into the contingency reserves that particular year. And I think it was about $300,000. Off the top, $100,000 was allocated towards a winter shelter, I believe, in Ukiah. So that left about $200,000. And before the board made clear that the money should be allocated, the remaining dollars should be allocated in equal amounts by each supervisor, so that presumably by supervisor district. The request came like a tidal wave in from the Ukiah-based nonprofits. And I think there was about, like I said, about $200,000. I think there were probably like about $4 million requested by the Ukiah-based nonprofits. Conversely, in the 4th District, where I purposely went to a variety of nonprofits that served very different groups, there was a small amount requested. And in the end, because 3 supervisors agreed, at least, that the amount should be allocated at the request of each supervisor, assuming it wasn't a crazy request, then it was equally distributed. The remaining $200,000 was equally distributed. So I think if we were to pick a number, and I don't think we have enough information today to do that, I think I would only support it if we agreed each supervisor would nominate projects, because I think then we would see an equal distribution. So just as a point of reference, $5,000 in the 4th District went to Piercy's community building, which is also their fire training center and community hall. $5,000 went to the Noyo Food Forest, which provides food in the schools in Fort Bragg. $5,000 went to the Family Resource Center in Fort Bragg, which helps out low-income families. And $5,000 went to the Mendocino Coast Botanical Gardens, which was looking at improving its irrigation system. So I thought that was a good, broad representation of groups in the 4th District, and I don't think anybody would question, the legitimacy of all those groups. So I think the board would be capable of coming up with a good diversity of organizations throughout the whole county. But I would only support some amount if we could have that kind of a process, because my concern is that we will get inundated with Ukiah nonprofits asking for every penny, and that we won't see money going to the underrepresented parts of this county.
CEO Antle.
Darcy Antle, interim CEO. I would like to point out and then ask Sarah if she has any comment as well. But the documentation and reporting requirements for this money is significantly different than the reporting requirements we had for CARES, where in the CARES Act in December, that was fall of 20, when we were giving out money to businesses and nonprofits in the community, they were able to track and document to a state level requirement. This time, these monies are federal, and we're reporting directly to the federal government. The guidelines for reporting are much stricter. This is something we became aware of early on as the final rules started changing. When we were giving money to a nonprofit that was giving extra funds out to a community resource center, for example, they would need to document how those dollars were spent and who received those fundings. So, Sarah, do you have anything else to add?
Acting Deputy CEO Sarah Pierce. Yes, the ARPA funding is very heavy on reporting. We do have to report down to programmatic level, such as meals served or number of food boxes distributed or number of households served for financial assistance. We also must report, recipients must report on whether projects are primarily serving disadvantaged communities in a qualified census tract. Another example is recipients must also identify the amount of total funds that are allocated based on evidence-based intervention, along with other requirements such as the recipient must be registered with sam.gov. So the reporting is a lot stricter than the CARES, and it is taking additional work for the nonprofits that are receiving the funds.
CEO Antle, do you have enough feedback from the board to bring this back?
Thank you, Darcy Antle, interim CEO. I think we can work with this and work with the ad hoc to move forward and have something for you on June 7th and 8th.
Do we have any public comment in the room? Please state your name for the record.
ways to open up hiring to people that have made the choice not to get the COVID vaccine. It's kind of a controversial thing, and not everyone's on board with doing it. We need to stop discriminating and spreading fear. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Okay, public comment online. First, we have Ron Edwards.
Good morning, Board, again. It was interesting to hear Director Rao mentioning vehicle use and reduction of that. And I'm wondering if the board has directed departments who have gotten technology to submit a way to reduce vehicle needs. So in other words, if we are using satellites, is that able to reduce the amount of vehicle miles traveled? And, these are small amounts, but I think that, when you're looking at a budget, when I look at mine, I've got to look at small areas, and those small areas add up. So I hope that we can be looking at those ways to become more efficient through technology. Thank you.
Matt Sonk.
Hi, this is Karen Matson. And I am the program administrator at the Mendocino County Museum. And I was just hoping that we might be able to contribute a plan, rethink our plan, and propose that to you at a future time. Thank you.
I would say absolutely. Reach out to CEO Antle. And do we have any voicemails?
No, we do not.
Okay. Can I invite a motion? Or do you want to just give direction to the CEO to bring back more details?
Chair Williams, would you like me to read back what I captured earlier on in this item?
Please.
Direct staff to continue to work with the ad hoc on the preliminary fiscal year 2022-23 budget, incorporating today's Board of Supervisors input, and return on June 7th and 8th with more information regarding possible reductions.
So move.
Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, let's vote by the button.
I'm sorry, could you repeat? Did you need something from me?
No, we were just voting. Minor detail.
The motion carries unanimously.